Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman Taylor. In this shorter episode, I wanted to fix the ending to episode 90, Clean Architecture and Subcutaneous Testing with Matthew Jeorrett. During the render, I'd messed up the timing of everything in the ending for that episode and wanted to supply you with a fixed version of that ending. I've already fixed the full version of the episode, and that should have updated in your podcatchers, but I wanted to give you a fixed version of the final few minutes as a separate file. That way you don't have to re-download the entire episode here just to get the value that Matthew added and the knowledge he wanted to share with us. So we're going to pick up where Matthew tells us that having zero dependencies in the MyBookingHub domain code made it trivial to add unit tests to. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin.
Believe it or not, is one of our kind of potential markets. Yeah, so it's there's a website in the show notes. So if people want to check us out, then they can click there and find out about it or get in touch. And on the second point, so how was MyBookingHub? What does it use in terms of all these ideas we've talked about? I think the key one was the clean architecture kind of structure, project structure. So I kind of borrowed a lot, like I say, from Jason Taylor, his clean architecture, and set up the kind of three layers which he describes. So the domain layer, which has zero dependencies, and it's this crunchy business logic we talked about that is complex and important in itself. The infrastructure layer talks to the external world, so it connects to the database, it sends emails, it handles HTTP over REST, and then the application there fills in the gap, so it hooks up the domain to the infrastructure. So that was kind of bedrock that we decided on very early on in MyBookingHub, and it stood the test of time. When we've had new features come in to be developed, I've never had too much difficulty in understanding how it breaks down into those parts of the application, into the architecture. For instance, the algorithm, the kind of crunchy bit that does the clever appointment suggesting, one of the problems with the existing system when we rewrote it was quite strongly integrated with the database, and so to test that you had to hook it up to a real database to write any tests against it. But with clean architecture, it became obvious that the making it zero dependency is what we needed to do, and that would go in the domain. And so by making the algorithm zero dependency, it makes it super easy to unit test. You can just fire in models at it without having to worry about database connection, and give us a high coverage in that. We've tested all the edge cases and the complexity of that. So that was a really important decision, and I think it's allowed us to understand going forward when we've continued to make changes to the algorithm and improve it.
Excellent. Okay. With all that said, if you were to give some advice to someone who wanted to either create from scratch or rewrite a system using some of the techniques we've discussed today, the different types of architecture, whether it's clean, hexagonal, monolithic, microservices, whatever, and all the different types of testing we've talked about and all the different things that you've talked about with MyBookingHub, do you have maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice you'd give to someone who's looking to do that, to sort of start from scratch? And are some of those pieces of advice, go watch this video, go read this book? Or is it more a case of, hey, just make sure you get the fundamentals right before you start? What are some of your pieces of advice?
Yeah, I think going in and reading, looking at the repo from Jason Taylor, and he's got many videos online. I think can't stress how excellent a resource that is, and so that'd be advice number one. And I think the only other bit of advice I would give is consistency over correctness. Once you've picked an approach, try and stick to that, and don't get lost in, we can make this better and we can do this thing differently. Try and set your principles early on and then stick to them, and then concentrate on building out the system using that architecture and those principles. It's very attractive to think, like 2 months after you've started your project, a new validation library comes out, or you find there's a better way of doing validation, and so you start writing validation in a different way, and then people coming into your project to see the same thing being done different ways, and it's really hard to understand what's going on. And I think something I keep on coming back to a lot recently is consistency over correctness. It doesn't matter if it's the best way of doing it, but if it works and it's the same as everything else, then people can understand that, and it saves the hassle of just looking at code and thinking, oh, I can't understand this, I'm going to have to sit and go through this and load it all into my memory before I can start to do anything. If the code's laid out in an expected way and it follows patterns, it's so important.
Sure. And it saves on context switching as well, right? So if there's a chunk of code, if there's one of these pie slices that does things a certain way, and then you finish the work on that pie slice, maybe you're implementing a feature or fixing a bug, and you jump to another pie slice to do some other work, and it is the same code base, it is talking to the same business logic area, it's filling in the same gaps with the application area, it's still got those connections to the outside where the same things are in place, but everything works completely differently. Maybe, like you say, you're doing validation differently, or maybe it's a different type of authentication, or maybe it's a different database for no real reason other than it's a different database. Not like, I'm not getting at like, oh, well, this bit's in ASP.NET identity because that's good fit for this project, and this bit is in whatever. I mean, just like completely different, right? This bit of the code talks to Oracle because the person who wrote it had an Oracle license and is safe with doing Oracle, right? The problem there is, like you say, you've got this context switch. When I come to work on that second chunk of code, I have to A, get an Oracle license, B, install loads of software, and then C, before I can even do that, I need to understand what the code's actually doing. So you're absolutely right. I think consistency is more important, because then you've got almost like a common language in the team. The whole idea of domain-driven design is that you write the. I'm probably going to mangle this. I'm trying to sort of reduce it a lot. You write the program and the logic such that it fits the domain of the problem and uses that common design language. We talked about it earlier. And then if you are doing things the exact same way, almost like coding standards, using the same libraries, using the same sort of setup, then the only thing you're switching on is the part of the problem that you're solving. Not, oh, and this bit's written in VB, or this bit's written in Go, or this bit's written in, there is scope for that in other projects. But if you're working on a single project that is, and I'm not trying to say that my booking hub is a small project, but if you're working on a single project that has this pie slice idea, there's a vertical design. Yeah, verticals. I always get vertical and horizontal the wrong way around. Always have done my entire life. But if you've got this vertical design idea, this pie slice idea, then you would expect jumping between the pie slices, a lot of it to be not the same, but very similarly put together, right?
Yeah, and it's on a really fine-grained level as well. It's not just about different languages and different database tools, but different naming and different structure. Linting on the code. I think linting, people will laugh and say it's linting, like focus on the important problems, but I think linting can actually make a code base much more readable, because anything that's different in a code base catches your eye. So in JavaScript, like semicolons are optional, but if half the files have or some of the lines don't have semicolons and some do, that catches your eye, and it doesn't matter in 99% but it catches your eye and it distracts you from what does matter. And so I think tight coding standards are important, and developers maybe think it's part of their identity is how they write code, but I think it's one of these things that's really about the team. It doesn't matter how you do it a lot of the time. It's about having that shared way of doing it. It should be a consensus, but then consistency over correctness. You do it that way. You don't waver from that for no good reason.
Sure. It goes back to that idea of what works for the team, right? For instance, a friend of the show, Zach, he says, I've had my last argument over linting. I've had my last argument over where the braces should go and where semicolons go. For context, he used to be a JavaScript developer. He's now moved to Python and things like that. He's had his last argument to do with that because the linter will take care of it for him. He's got his IDE set up, so he hits Control S, and the coding standards are applied for him, so he doesn't have to remember. So if his personal I am writing it in the flow coding standards are that he doesn't put semicolons on, he knows that when he hits Control S or Control bang QW or whatever, because he's a Vim user, he knows that when he exits out of that file and saves it, the linter will step in and do the bits that, put the semicolons in, rearrange how, put the brackets here and put this, that, and the other. And then he doesn't have to think about it. He's done the hard part of translating his thought into the syntax for the language. And then the tool comes along and sort of Pretifys it. I don't want to reduce that, but it puts it into the right coding standards for that team that he's working alongside of. And I think it's a very important thing to mention. I think things like editor config and linters are so important, and most of the IDEs hook into these things and will do it all for you. And so I think it's a great idea. I think you're right. I think consistency, not just like you say, not just the libraries we use, the way we write it, but actually how the code looks when it's loaded into your IDE, when you're looking at the characters. That's as important too. I like it.
Yeah, you say Pretify, but that's actually the name of the tool. Like a common tool is Pretify. The name of the ticket was Pretify on save. We actually put that in the front end recently, yeah, so that we get that functionality. It's just modern tools like devs doing dev tooling for devs, and it's so beneficial.
Yeah, excellent. I like it because then it's similar to what's it called? Like Babel and things like that. So you can write whatever version of JavaScript you want, and it will get transpiled down to a version that you're targeting IE. So you write it with the arrow syntax. I'll take care of the difficult bit of doing all of that wiring up for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And yeah, it's the tools. If the entire team writes with the arrow syntax, but then you have to target IE, you're going to have problems. But if you have a tool that sits in between and sorts it out for you, fantastic. You've got that consistency. It doesn't matter if it's correct or not. You've got that consistency. I like it. So, Matthew, right, as we come towards the wrapping up, how can people get in touch with you? What was the URL for my booking hub again? And do you have any sort of top resources you recommend? I know you've said a lot. You'd say go watch Jason Taylor's videos and read some of his posts. Are there any others? That kind of thing. Just like, let's help spread some knowledge,
Yeah, for sure. So I don't actually, it's one of these things, I've not got around to a website which people can contact me, but like LinkedIn, fire me a message and I'd be more than happy to elaborate on any of the things we raised or just hook up with people. Yeah, Jason Taylor, his GitHub handle is Jason Taylor Dev /Clean Architecture. Hopefully that'll be in the show notes as well. I think a completely different style of resource, but one that I always go back to is there's a website called The Morning Brew by Chris Alcock. And it's just a really good distillation of things that have been happening, kind of .NET, Microsoft focused with a little bit of React and Angular. And every weekday he posts around 10 articles that just give you a flavour of what the most recent things are. And anyone in the office who's like, oh, they knew the version of .NET's getting released this week. How do they know that? One way you can do that is just hook into the Morning Brew.
I have to say I used to use that quite a lot. I would, on the train into work, I'd be on the phone, read through a few articles, bookmark a few, get into work where I used to work. As soon as we hit Slack, right, guys, you got to read these 3 articles because they're amazing. And none of it is related to what you're doing, but hey, check these out. This is where the industry's going, or hey, there's this cool new feature coming to Xamarin or whatever. It's a wonderful resource. It really is. So yeah, I can recommend that too.
Yeah, I'll give you make sure the link's in the show notes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Everything we've talked about will be in the show notes, so people don't. I have to make this joke about so you don't have to, if you're driving into work, you don't have to dive over the dashboard to hit the pause button, so you remember the time code for when you said it or anything like that. Everything's in the show notes, so don't worry about that. But yes, I guess Matthew, all that really remains to say is to thank you ever so much for being on the show, and to thank you for sharing your knowledge. And I hope that lots of people go check out my booking hub and get in touch with you on LinkedIn.
Thanks very much, Jamie. It's been a pleasure. Always like talking tech.
Excellent. Well, thank you ever so much. That was my interview with Matthew Jeorrett about the clean architecture and subcutaneous testing. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, or to reach out via our contact page at .netcore.show/contact, and obviously to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.